Oh, what's good, my man in society? It is your host with the most, Shadow Log, back at you with another video. Make sure you guys like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. It's absolutely free. That is how you help my channel get into the algorithm. Highly appreciate if you go ahead and do that. Now, what we'll be discussing today is Caetano Gordino, one of Argentina's most youngest serial killer, being that he was a serial killer at the age of 7 years old, as you guys can see from the pictures. Um, it never ceases to surprise me, like, of the kind of crazed individuals that have walked this planet, right? And being the fact that the age that he was, and being so disturbed already, right? So Argentina's youngest serial killer, Caetano Gordino, was arrested and convicted for 4 murders, 7 attempted murders, 2 assaults, and several arson, and along with indecent exposure and nude acts. So the individual had, quite a rap sheet to him. 4 murders and 7 attempted murders in itself is horrendous. Plus, you add now the sexual, crimes and the arson and man, like I said, at 7 years old, this is crazy, right? So he grew up to in Argentina to two Italian. His parents were Italian. They had moved to Argentina, for a better life, but the father was an alcoholic. Mother was also an alcoholic. The father was very aggressive, very abusive. The father kind of tended to do whatever he wanted. As a matter of fact, he even contracted syphilis before Caetano was even born. And right, so obviously, when he was born with a lot of health problems because of his father's disease, right? From being in the streets and hooking up with prostitutes. When his mother would confront him, he witnesses a lot of abuse. His father, abusing his mother physically, mentally, and everything like that, right? So he had a fucked up childhood, let's just say, right? There was warning signs since the beginning, right? Since a very young age, he would kill animals. He would kill birds, rabbits, anything he would find, or pets. He killed them, and he would put them underneath his bed. You know. So when his father found all these pets, he beat the living shit out of him. Hoping that will straighten out, his son. You already know that doesn't work, and it tends to make shit worse. But you know, a lot of people still think that beating a child to submission is the proper way to school them. Probably why we have a lot of deranged individuals in this planet, right? Okay, so his first victim, his first attempts were non-successful. He would lure kids away into a secluded area, by promising them candies and stuff like that, right? And they would go, where he would attempt to kill them, right? A few times, adults, meddled in, right? They heard the commotion, they went and they stopped them, right? And a few of those times, 2 of those times, it was by cops themselves that had stopped him from committing these acts. The thing was that since he was so young, 7 years old, and look at how he looks right there. I mean, they really thought that it was an accident, or he didn't mean to, or but they just dismiss it. They dismissed it because I mean, who would think a 7 year old trying to kill some? You get what I'm saying? So they didn't really think nothing of it. So he didn't get charged at that time, right? His first victim was a 3-year-old girl that he buried alive. He beat her, choked her. She was still alive though when he buried her alive. His next victim, he hit, in the head with a blunt object that had a nail in it, right, killing him. As a matter of fact, he even went to that kid's to the awake, where and he even touched the body and the casket and everything like that. At the time, they didn't know that he was the killer, so he got pleasure in doing that, right? Another little girl, he set her on fire, so that's how she died. So don't think that this kid was like, this kid was killing his victims in horrendous ways. Burning alive, buried alive, hitting the head with a nail, like, you know what I mean? Like he was, you know, and like I said, there was several attempts, 7 attempts, another children, right? That luckily, parents interfered, and he wasn't able to complete his thing, right? And like I said, he would set, buildings on fire. He would be touching himself in public. Don't think like he was like or trying to masturbate in like, like whatever, but like in public with everyone's watching, right? So he was very disturbed, right? There was a lot of warning signs since the beginning, but the parents didn't take no action because they thought that they could write in their kid up by just, some beatings, right? But obviously the beatings weren't working. You know what I mean? Because they don't work. You can't fix problems with, abuse and violence. You will never fix violence with violence. That's just not how the world works. But understanding his father in his childhood, you can see how this kid, grew up being the way he is. Very disturbed. So, like I said, you know, serial killers. It takes the right storm to brew them, right? And it doesn't only, it's not only adults or older men and stuff like it. It could even be children, right? Because, like I said, with a rap sheet like that and being at the age he was, I mean, in itself is already wild, to think that a 7-year-old kid could be burning people alive and burying them alive. And you know what I mean? Like, you would think that the kids playing outside together, you wouldn't have to worry about watching them like that, right? Like, or having to worry about one of them killing another one, right? Like, if your 3-year-old or your 5-year-old is outside playing with a 7-year-old, you wouldn't think that. But like I said, you just never know because there's individuals that have been through some shit and they're just not all that right. They may seem like they're right because, he looks like he's innocent, right? But who would have known what was going on in his head, a depraved mind, you know what I mean? Who kept getting away with his crimes because of how he looked, because of his age, that they really didn't think that, he was the killer. That's why he was able to kill so many and attempted to kill so many kids because of his innocence, because of how he looked, because of the way that people seen things, right? And wouldn't never believe. But like I said, you just never know in this world, and that's a crazy thought. Have you guys heard of this case? There's plenty of documentaries and articles and all of that covering, the life of, this individual. So if you guys, are curious and look up into it, just to let you know, like I said, the details are, gruesome. Some of the stuff I can't even talk about on here, right? Because my video will get shut down by YouTube. So just to let you know that this individual, like I said, this world is a trip, and it's not, like I said, it's just not an American problem or a Western problem. You know what I mean? But this problem could exist anywhere. It has existed everywhere, right? And from the youngest to the youngest, it's a trip. But what do you guys think? Have you heard of this case? Leave it in the comments. And Shadow, we out.